good.
How's JRTC?
It was brutal, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, the humidity.
Oh, the
It was
humidity at
like,
Fort Polk. People don't
so
know.
yeah, so you would be 90 something, but the heat index would break over 105. And apparently we were down there during a heat wave. So it didn't have much impact on me, but I felt bad for a lot of the other soldiers who were just struggling with it.
Yeah.
And being in operations, you can actually shelter yourself from that heat by being inside of tents because our servers have to be air conditioned in order to function. And so you could see the staff that was just been in all day and they're not acclimatizing to the heat, and they come out for just a little bit and they're just drenched and exhausted. I thought, but you know what? That's on them. But
It's two different worlds. It's definitely two different worlds. Either one being in the field and like being part of and sucking in all the elements of the environment around you, and then compared to being like a staff officer or something like what you're talking about, being in a command operations center tent, which normally, yeah, like you said, if you're running any kind of computer systems, especially if it's any kind of like network systems, then they have to have air conditioning to keep those switches and stuff cool. We've ran a lot of fire support coordination centers and stuff like that out of. Oh, did my camera just cut off?
yeah, it looks like it.
That was weird. We've run a lot of those out of tents in the back of Humvees, like high back Humvees and stuff like that. But it's it's different. So how many times have you been to JRTC?
So actually, I've only been there twice, and I've done N2C once. I've been very, very fortunate in that regard, in those kind of training environments. But I have to say that it's beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
They tell you right from the beginning, hey, you're going to walk away better than what you walked in. And there's truth in that, because whatever marker you're stepping into that role, you're going to improve.
I don't know what is going on. My camera is like freaking out. That has never happened before. That is not anything that's ever happened before, because they'll like change colors and then blacked out.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, the people that have listened to this, I think the episode I did with Michael Farrell, I was kind of explaining it. You know, I have to tear down and set up every time I do a podcast. This is in my living room. Like, this is my living room. Yeah, this is my living room. So doing that, the connectors and all the stuff gets worn out. And then if I have people here, it's a different setup because I have, multiple people here. So I got to set up more microphones, and it's a technical nightmare sometimes. And I've never gone to school for it or anything like that. I've just kind of learned it on the go. And, so I'm wanting to upgrade all my stuff. So that's my next step, is upgrading so that it can be, I don't know, one, more reliable. I'd like to move into a bigger place so I can set up a room that's like a studio, or at some point rent out a commercial space and build a studio. But yeah, anyways, so that's fixed. So we were talking JRTC. Yeah, man, is JRTC and NTC, how often does it evolve? Or is it like, we're going to JRTC, it's going to be the same thing as it was last time? Or is it like constantly evolving?
It's becoming full-scale combat operations, meaning if you're going to NTC, you're going to be involved in maneuver, meaning armor. If you're going to be at JRTC, what I saw, we're going to have some armor there, but the environment isn't conducive to allow armor-free maneuver. So it's going to be a big light infantry fight supported by air. And apparently they're opening up a new one in Alaska.
Oh, that's cool. That makes sense. That we there's been a lot of talk, like a pivot towards the Pacific, kind of watching China. They're the next big threat. But at the same time, a lot of people that watch military stuff are all looking up around Alaska and the Arctic Circle, because that area is contentious, and it's also rich in minerals and stuff that we need for all this renewable energy and blah, blah, blah. All that stuff, we got to get that from somewhere. And Russia has kind of a leg up. I think they've had people like in Siberia, in Arctic conditions more often. I mean, we have people in Alaska, obviously, but not, I don't think at the same scale. So I think they're going to start trying to work more scenarios in that area and learn some TTPs for operating in that Arctic environment. Is that something you've seen?
I see. Well, obviously, we're talking on a strategic sense. And if I wanted to play the role of adversary, I would think the United States has never been invaded. Outside a few Mexican skirmishes.
No. During World War II, actually, the Japanese invaded in Alaska.
Right, the Aleutian Islands.
Yep.
And that was, in my understanding, that was actually an effort to divert our resources for the main effort. And so we did send a force up there to oppose that, the Japanese, when they went after the Aleutian Islands. But it was very one-sided from what I understand. I could be wrong on that.
I think you're right. I think a lot of almost like National Guard militia troops did a lot of the defense. Made up a lot of by the like Native Americans, like the Eskimos or whatever. I don't know if that's the proper term for them, but
right.
Native Americans in Alaska. So yeah, I think they were all part of the defense of that when Japan attacked. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So you have those string of islands, and what I was leading to was, if I was an adversary, I would have to look at that again, but rather than making an effort to divert resources away from the main effort, I would think of that as a potential a foothold to finally begin an invasion of the United States.
Yeah, no, for sure. It'd be a tough spot to survive that, though, if you're not accustomed to it, which is smart, that they're rotating people up there. I actually got to go to Alaska back in 2000. It was 2008, or maybe it was the winter of 2007. We were testing the ITV, the internally transportable vehicle, which is like a little Jeep-looking truck that towed a 120 millimeter mortar, and it had to have some like Arctic testing for both the vehicle and the mortar system. So we flew up there to right outside of Fairbanks. There's a I think it's an Air Force base because it's got the intercontinental ballistic missiles defense like place right there. Bolio Lake Test Facility is what it's called. Okay. It's right outside of Delta Junction, Alaska, which is this tiny ass town. I mean, literally, like you go to the general store, it's like a couple hundred people in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. We got to see like the pipeline, moose, caribou, all that shit. We were there, and they were bringing these mortars up to test, and they forgot to take the firing pins out of them. So when they were going to cross into Canada, not only did they didn't take the firing pins out, but they put the wrong ones in the wrong trucks. So the bill of lading or whatever it's called, the list of them weren't correct. Like the serial numbers weren't in the right trucks. Right. So the mortar systems all got delayed at the border, and we had flown up there, so we had nothing to do. So they're like, hey, use this time to kind of do whatever. Go use the MWR facility that they have at the base. And guys rented snowmobiles. One of the guys got a hunting license. A lieutenant got a hunting license and borrowed a rifle from one of the retired Army guys that was working there as a civilian, and went and smoked some snow hares. And we went ice fishing, caught a bunch of rainbow trout, and then the last night, we had a big ass cookout and cooked the rainbow trout, the snow hares, and the civilian dude that let him borrow the rifle brought in a bunch of moose meat. We had moose burgers and stuff. Yeah, it was a cool time. I got to see the Northern Lights, which was pretty amazing. So
yeah, I've never been up there in that kind of country before. But what I do know is a cold weather soldier has to be one of the most disciplined troops all around. Mm-hmm. And And what I mean by that is you think about what the Finnish, is that how you pronounce it, from Finland?
Mm-hmm.
What they did to the Russians. You know, they attacked them, and their whole strategy was to make them uncomfortable. They never allowed them to get warm.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of the, you know, the sniping capabilities, obviously one of the most world famous snipers came out of there. He, 500 kills? That's incredible. With iron sight. He did that all with iron sight. And, you know, and that just shows me, like, if you don't have your discipline, your shit together, so to speak, you're not going to get anywhere. And I remember guys up in mountain warfare school during summer. California has unique weather. At night it's beautiful, 80s. You know, sometimes it might reach warm 90s. But at night, up there in the Sierra Nevada mountains, it will drop to freezing at night. And so you had to carry both seasons with you.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it's cold and it's freezing, you have to get out of your bag. And there were guys that were refused. They couldn't function anymore. Their bodies were stiff. And I was like, damn, brother, just get past the pain. Just get up.
Are you talking about, did you go up there with the Marines, or does the Army also have
with the Marines. I went up there twice.
To Bridgeport, for those that don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a Marine. It's the
Pico Meadows.
Pico Meadows, Bridgewater? No,
Bridgeport.
Yeah, so the first time I went up there, I went there as conventional infantry. 30 days, had a great time, beautiful country.
Summer or winter?
Summer. Both times are summer.
Okay.
And the second time I went up there was because I was already signed to 1/6 stay, so I went as a sniper. And when you're a sniper, you have to take 2 courses, basically, all in that 30-day area. And one of them was assault climber. And so you're climbing these cliff sides.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the most uncomfortable thing to be at such great heights. And then you're setting up retrievable rappels. That was amazing to me. I learned so much. I still know all my knots. I still know them to this day. And I always brag about it. Hey, you know where I learned that knot? Not warfare school. So, but
yeah, I know a few guys that have been to the schools up there and they loved it. And, you know, they came back, and one of them, after he came back, he just started going back to all the courses. Like, he went for the summer leader course, and then he was like, oh, that was awesome. So then he turned around and went to the winter leader course. And then, well, I'm already here, and this course rolls right into the winter survival school. So it's like he was just, like, lived up in the mountains for, like, months at a time, like, going through these courses. I was like, geez, man. You know, he was one of the recon Marines that was on our deployment. When he came back, that was kind of his cycle. Like, he just started heading up to the mountains. And I was like, how you liking it? You know, obviously it's a good time. He's like, dude, I love it. You know, it's like one of those things, like, I think it's until you've been introduced to, like, going up into somewhere like the Sierra Nevadas and, like, getting around the backcountry a little bit, it's kind of hard to imagine doing it. But once you've, like, done it and you're like, oh, this isn't, like, inaccessible. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, this is, obviously have to be smart about yourself if you're going to be wandering around the backcountry. But it's like the views and stuff you see are going to be unmatched, you know?
Yeah. Well, so you got to be, this is what I remember. I mean, it's been a long time, but I remember we did a survival course for a few days up there, and where you had to spend like 3 days by yourself. And I remember one of the key things they told me to retain your body heat, if you're down to the bare minimum, was a garbage bag. And you wear that thing like a shirt. And lo and behold, man, I'm in Afghanistan, and I remember, like, we're going up into the mountains. So I took that little element that I remembered from school. I took it with me, and I'm wearing a black garbage bag at one point. Temperatures dropped, and it was really, really bad. So there was 37 Americans on this mission, and we had over 17 injuries, and most of them were cold weather. And I remember the acting commander saw me in my garbage bag. He goes, Martinez, I can't talk to you seriously wearing that garbage bag. And I looked at him, and I'm like, that's your fucking problem, sir, not mine. And the other thing I remember was, don't lay on the ground. Put something between you and the ground. Even if you sit next to one, do not lay on that ground. Brother, we had got that same commander went into hypothermia and passed out.
Oh, really?
Another guy I had to drag him to a farmer's silo, dig out wheat. He had like some kind of grain, wheat, long stem kind of trash. And I remember digging a hole, put him in there, and then wrapping myself around him to prevent hypothermia. He was already hypothermia because he was also passing out. We had a key number of personnel passing out because they thought they could handle the cold. And if it wasn't for my Marine Corps training, I honestly, to the day I die, believe this, I would have followed in their lane going, well, they're going to tough it out, I'm going to tough it out. It's just a mind over matter. But it just shows me, it demonstrates clearly to me, when you're ignorant, you're a dumb ignorant. God, you're dumb ignorant.
Well, when you're talking about stuff like that, your ignorance is risking your life. You know, yes, there are like, hey, let's tough it out a little bit. You know, like when it's a little cold out, like, you know, get accustomed to it, get acclimated to it. That way, when you're in that shitty situation that you're talking about, you can handle it better. But you're also not supposed to be a tough guy, you know, in the most like extreme like situations and stuff. You know, that's how you really get. I mean, it's one of those things too. Like people don't know. If you don't know, you don't know. If you've never been in the mountains, you've never been in like extreme cold weather, then have you ever heard like don't warm your hands over boiling water? You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, shit like that you wouldn't even think about. That sounds like, oh, well, duh, you'll get
here's
frostbite, you know, but
here's the irony without pointing the finger directly at the unit. They were from Vermont and they were in mountain.
Wow, really?
And they were violating the rules of so many rules that I saw of how to work in cold weather.
Wow, yeah.
That it was shocking.
Huh. And yeah, so, well, that's not an excuse then. They should know better.
Exactly. And I have to go as far because there were some really good guys in that unit, hardcore guys. Mm-hmm. And that's a story in itself. That was in Afghanistan. But anyway, yeah, man, those were great schools for me. Jungle school just made me realize that anything in the jungle will kill you outside the enemy. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, I've never really had any experience in the jungle. I kind of regret like not being able to even like go to like Okinawa, you know, and do because they have a jungle warfare training course there, the school there. Where's the armies? Is that where the armies is as well as Okinawa? The jungle warfare school?
Well, back in the day, I went to Okinawa's jungle school. That was an NTA. But before that one, I went to Jungle Operations Training Center in Panama, Fort Sherman. And I did jungle school down there. The worst jungle I ever been in, the most dangerous jungle I've ever been in, was Panama. Everything could kill you in that son of a bitch, man.
Yeah.
The trees, bees, lightning, flash floods, crocodiles, bats. Oh my God, ants.
Yeah, all of it.
Yeah, I mean, I just can go on and on.
Hey, so I wanted to talk to you this time because I know people were interested last time. I had it in the title, but we never talked about it. Was you volunteering for the Peshmerga and doing that whole thing? And I think it's an interesting topic to go over because people are doing and considering volunteering to go to like Ukraine and stuff. Obviously, different situation, different war. But I think some of the thought process. The thought process for both is probably similar, I would imagine. So I'd like to hear kind of your, I guess, when did you start kicking around that? Like, how did you get the idea to do something like that? And, you know, like at what point in your life were you like, yeah, this is something I think I had to do?
Okay, so there's one thing that's kind of off topic that I got to get out of because my son corrected me on it. In the earlier episode, I said my son was TAC P. And he called me up and he's like, you son of a bitch. He goes, I was PJ. I'm like, all right, calm down. You're still in the Air Force and no one cares.
Oh, that's a huge difference, though. That's a huge difference.
Yeah. There's a huge difference. But just to be accurate, what happened was he had made it what they called the Superman school. And then he ended up waiting to go to airborne school. And he went down to Eglin Air Force Base to teach the Marines because he at that point he had like 850 hours of scuba diving, military scuba diving, and they found him with asthma. So after they completed the most physical and highest attrition rate part of that pipeline, he ended up with asthma. And he said, well, get me out of the general. And with that, he went into the Marine Corps. So that's as far as he ever went, was that 13-week course, because that's a 17-month pipeline.
Yeah, that's
I
a huge.
just wanted to correct that, get that out of the way.
People may not realize that PJs actually have the longest training pipeline out of all the special operations. Unless something has changed, I'm pretty sure that's still accurate. They have the longest training pipeline out of all the special operations, like elements, I guess.
Yeah, I got to say this, though. The TACPs are pretty impressive. I mean, they come a long way. They really have. I was just down at JRTC with TACPs. Ranger qualified. You know, they probably got airborne. And a lot of them are former service guys, former Marines, former Army, and they're crossing into the Air Force to bring these skills and grab those opportunities. But both lanes are very, very impressive, in my personal opinion, and what I've worked with.
Yeah.
But
they're not the same. You know, they're not the same, though. Yeah,
no, they're not the same. But he wanted me to correct that, so I had to get that out. So getting back to the original question of how this whole adventure and journey led us to Iraq. My son had just gotten out of the Marine Corps, my second oldest son. He was about 22 at this point. Still young, full of ideas. One day he comes up to me and he says, hey, Dad, I'm thinking about becoming a combat correspondent, freelance. I say, hey, let me put you in touch with some people and you can discuss this lane with them. But I don't know why you're doing it, but I don't want to put in my 2 cents and try to guess. So let me put you in touch with some people. So I did. And it came back and he said, you know, Dad, I really thought the whole thing and I don't want to do that. I think what I want to do is I want to go fight ISIS. I thought, all right, well, that's what you want to do. I said, where's your research taking you? And at that point, he had done a cursory check. I said, I'll tell you what, James, if you're really serious, let me do some research. Let me help you out. Let's vet some people before we just start taking information from anyone. And we'll ask certain questions. So we worked at it a little bit. In the midst of this, my oldest son, and he comes up and he's like, hey, Dad, his name is Josh. And he says, Dad, James is going, I'm going. I'm like, what? That threw me for a loop. I can deal with one, but both of them and their level of experience at that point was only E4. At this point, I was in E7. And I said, no freaking way. I go, I don't think you boys understand what you're getting involved in. You're going to go get assigned to units, or probably American units, or a mix of Westerners from Europe, other parts of the world, and someone's going to be put in charge of you. Because they've been there longer, and you're going to trust that the vetting system is accurate. I'm like, it's not happening. So I'm going to go with you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a bit of more of an operational level. I have a bit more experience in working operations and tactics. So let me go with you. And not that they have much choice, and all three of us left. Well, between the moment that decision was made and we actually boarded a plane to Sulaymaniyah, Iraq, about 9 months had progressed between the two events. And we spoke to a lot of people. And some of them like, no, we're not doing that. No, we're not going to go with you. And we ended up inadvertently getting involved with an individual who I'll call him Lucy. Okay? And it started out with a conversation, some on Facebook. And that conversation, the remark provoked me to put in my own remarks. And basically I was like, hey, look, I don't hate Sunni or Shia. It was a very racist remark. And I said, look, I've met some really good Sunni people out there in the city where I was killing a lot of Sunni. And I met a lot of Shia who had come into the city and they were doing some terrible things. But in the midst of all that, I saw beyond the lines. And to me, a person is a person. So you just can't group a bunch of people together and say, those are all terrible people.
Mm-hmm.
It was something along that line. So Lucy comes in and he says, hey, man, I really liked your remark. I thought that was really open-minded. He was former Marine himself. Turns out reservist, E4 level. Hold on a second. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
And so we ended up getting into a conversation, and he says, hey, I'm running a program in where I bring Americans into Iraq. And I said, okay, let's do it face-to-face. And I said, and I collected more information. He was legit.
When you say you collected more information, like, first off, I think most parents would, if their kid said they were going to go overseas to fight ISIS, they'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? And you're like helping the logistics. You're like, well, if we're going to do it, we might as well do it the correct way. You know, it's a very like utilitarian approach to the whole thing. But what kind of information? I mean, it just seems crazy that it's in my own mind, it's like wild that there's these conversations happening out there. You know, like, hey man, how can I get to Iraq with this unit or whatever? Like, who do you even begin to reach out to like make this happen? You know, are there groups online or?
So I spoke to individuals that represented the YPJ, the YPG. I spoke to individuals that represented the lines of Rojava. I spoke to other individuals that claimed that they were there, and through a series of questions, and I'm like, I'm not buying that. And in meeting Lucy, he already had a team in country. He said, hey, this is the hospital where I will put you in. And from there we branch out. And this is the process that it takes for you to stay in Iraq beyond a tourist time. Mm-hmm. And it was called a residence card. And he had this whole process all lined out. It was, in addition, I believe we talked to people that are already over there from his group. And so I said, well, look, Lucy, come to my house. And he was from Las Vegas. I said, come to my house. We'll do a face-to-face. In addition to that, he had already connections with a reporter from Fox News. And so we all got together. The Fox News reporter endorsed him. And the information that he was giving me from who he put in there, what he wants to accomplish, why he's doing it, it sounded legitimate to me. And to be perfectly honest, it was. However, and this is probably jumping ahead a little bit, that relationship, while in country, there's just the one thing that I stipulated to him. I said, Lucy, I'm going in there with my sons on your word. But I think it would be a lot better for you to come with us. And he goes, well, I was only going to go as far as Jordan with you guys, and then I was going to turn around and bring in another team. And that didn't sound right to me. I'm like, okay, well, I'd rather you go with us into Solomania and take us to this hospital. So he agrees to it. And the other thing I did was I opened up a GoFundMe because this was all on our own. We got a few $1,000. Not a lot, but enough to like, okay, this is what we need. We're going to need weapons. We're going to need some type of different equipment. We're going to need seasonal clothes because our intent was to be there for a year. Do 6 months, evaluate where we are at, see whether we want to continue for another 6 months. And if that's the case, then, we'll go that full year. We never made it to that year. We never even made it to the 6 month. Mm. And there's a lot of contributing factors because of that. But to stay in chronological order, we ended up being approached by a well-known established author and publisher. They do documentaries. And they wanted to do a story on us. And they wanted to document the entire event. And to me personally, I was like, I don't want to do this. I already got enough distractions with you boys going into this fight. I want to focus on what we need to do. But I also felt like it wasn't fair for me to deny my sons their moment, something captured that will stay with them for their lifetime. Because I'm already featured in 2 books, my exploits as a sniper in Ramadi. And so I thought, let me be fair to them. If they want to do this documentary, I'm good with it. But I want to express, I wanted to be sure they understood my position, which was, I don't want them to do this on us. Because the hope is that one of us will get killed, or all of us will get killed. Otherwise, they make no money on it. Who cares about a family that goes over there and goes through this experience and all comes back? They'll make more money if one of us gets killed.
Yeah.
And so I remember we were at Fort Dix. And at the time, I was an infantry OCS military instructor. And that means I floated between the infantry school and the OCS program as what we call black hats. And I remember my son, I brought him to support the mission in logistics. And I said, hey, and I brought in my other son. We're sitting around this bench table. And I expressed my thoughts. I don't want this to happen. It's a distraction. I said, but we'll vote on it. And then, of course, they voted, let's do it. So we did it. And that being said, we met this author who's had movies made from his books made into movies. He's done several documentaries, been a spokesman on TED. And I don't know why, but I had a bias in me. Like I didn't get along with him. And I didn't like the whole thing at all. But they assigned us this person that was going to document everything, and he would join us later in Iraq. Now, the reason I bring this up is when Lucy followed us out to Iraq, we landed in Sulaymaniyah, and personalities started to rise. We had problems. Mm-hmm. And to quite sum it up, I thought he was although he had great ideas and he can begin the idea, he was not a good manager. And he was taking great risk with me and my son's lives. To illustrate an example, he tells me at one point, hey, we're going to move from Kirkuk to this particular city, Dahuk. It's a hell of a trip. And he says, we're going to get on the bus, that we're going to hire a driver and all this. I'm like, all right, that's fine. And it turns out it's a public bus. And I get on there and I tell Lisa, I told him, are you stupid? You're going to make us, obvious Americans, with no weapons, we're dressed ready to go to war, basically. We're wearing 5.11 clothes. Some are actually military clothing. By this time, there's 10 of us. And you're going to make us board this bus. And at any point, the Shia want to kill us, the Sunni want to kill us, and ISIS wants to kill us. I said, you're going to make us get on this bus, me and my sons, and jeopardize our life. So he goes, look, man, I think you're overreacting. Relax, just get on the bus. And I go, I'm not getting on the damn bus. Ultimately, I would relent, change my mind, get on. But at this point, the friction was high between the two of us. When we reached our final destination, and I believe we were going to Kirkuk, actually. So we were in Sulaymaniyah going to Kirkuk. The first thing the colonel said to us, he was like, you guys came on a public bus here? And he spoke English. And Lucy said yes. He goes, don't ever do that again. That's stupid. You could have gotten killed. All it takes is one bomber to get on that bus. And I look at him like, no shit. So that made him really look bad. The other issue became he wanted to negotiate contracts between these people that were going to document us. And he wanted to start his own documentary. And he wanted to make money on that. And he was very unclear. And at this point, I was losing respect for him. And so I did what I normally did. I severed ties with him. It's not working out. I can break up with women very easily. I can break up with businessmen very easily.
Is this while you're in country, though?
This is while we're in country now.
So how do you just break? I mean, I guess you can find your own way back if you had to.
Yeah, so when we got into so we had to tell him like, hey, you're fired, Lucy. You're done. We want nothing to do with you. So he actually led us to this hospital in Solomania, and it was a very cramped room. And the biggest thing in order to move around the country without being hindered is you needed this residence card. So I started to ask around like, hey, where's this residence card? How do we get it? Oh, you got to be sponsored by somebody. How long you been here? I've been here for like 3-4 months. I go, waiting on a residence card? That's insane. So this is before we even see the front.
How long is the tourist visa good for?
I think 30 days.
Okay.
That's it. And then you stay illegal. People were staying after that period of time, and they just went from group to group because there's various Western groups in Iraq at this point. Some were well known, some were lesser known, and they all functioned, in my eyes, my impression was like gangs. Each of them had their own unique names. I was meeting guys that were kicked out from one group and joined another. I'm like, why did you leave that group? And they're like, hey, you got this guy over there, and he's just a bully, and he really doesn't know much, and people are questioning him, and his idea is to beat people up. And they're like, holy cow. So I thought, well, I don't want to get involved in that. And there was this particular individual that kept being brought up in that light. And they had approached us and said, hey, we want you guys to join. And I told my sons, I'm like, we're not joining them, because the first thing we have to do is we're going to have to kill that son of a bitch. We're literally going to have to kill him, because I'm not going to be bullied around by some guy because he thinks he's bigger than me, or he thinks he knows more just because he says he knows more. This is what it's like. This is literally what it's like being in Iraq as a Western volunteer on your own. And I thought, you know what? I'm firing Lucy. I'm going to look at the guys that we got here. And in that, I met a set of brothers. And we'll call one Mother, and we'll call the other one Pullo. We'll call him Pullo. So Pullo and Mother are brothers, very close in age. They speak 3 languages: Spanish fluently, English fluently, and they're very good at speaking Arabic. So I thought, okay, and we sit down and have a meeting with them, me and my sons with these 2 brothers. I explain the situation, and I tell them I want to create our own team. And they're like, okay, so how do you want to do it? Well, these 2 brothers turned out to be former Army officers, both from the National Guard. I believe one was active duty and the other one was National Guard. And we're kind of looking at each other across the table, and we're trying to figure out who's telling the truth. So I'm like, look, you want to see my ID card? I'm carrying my military ID card. Like, here's my military ID card. Here's people that I know that you can contact. And they start doing the same. So of the brothers, one's really nice, and the other one's a little bit more skeptical. But we ended up working together. And it turns out that I said, let's get as many people as we can. I said, I want to form at least 10 to 12 guys. And so I started poaching in the local area. And we ended up with 10 guys. And the reason I went around that number was because I had 9 months experience working with special forces in Iraq, supplementing their force protection and their sniper effort. And so I saw how they functioned. Like each member of the team had a specific role to play on their little base, on their little footprint. So I kind of mimicked that. And then it became down to, where are we going to go fight ISIS? And the battle at the time was Sinjar. Do you remember Sinjar at all?
I never went to Sinjar, but I'm aware. Yeah, and they have the Mount Sinjar, and they had there was a group of
Yazidi.
Yeah, there was a whole group that was trapped on the mountain that they were going to kill and shit, and then we pulled. Right. I think we sent in a group to pull them out.
Okay, so it's the year's 2015. It's the summer of 2015, and we decide we're going to Sinjar. The problem is nobody's allowed in Sinjar. So at this point, I've got a 10-man group, which included 8 former 82nd Airborne, the 2 brothers, me and my 3 sons, emergency medical room doctor, and another one was a National Guardsman's medic who had never deployed before, decided to come out as to contribute to the effort fighting ISIS. And we had a young man from Finland who said he was an officer in the Corps. And then we had a former French foreign legionnaire who was British. That was all of us. Very unique group. And we decided, okay, we're going to go to Sinjar, but we're going to have to get smuggled in. But let's try get our residence. Let's try to get our residence card so we can move about the country. Because throughout the country, the Shia had set up checkpoints. And the Shia, for whatever reason, were very hostile to Westerners. At least that was my experience. And we had to hide. At one point, we're in Kirkuk, and we're talking to the Iraqi army, and they're saying, hey, look, why don't you sit down with us, tell us what you bring to the table, maybe you can help us train us to get ready for this fight, because they had lost so much ground to ISIS in the northern area. So we said, sure, we'll do it. And it turns out, while we're in the middle of this conversation, some guy walks into the room. He's like, hey, man, the Shia are here, and we need to hide them. And so we gathered all our gear. We brought it into the room, and there's 10 of us grouped in there. And we have this Iraqi army soldier holding an AK-47 aiming it at the door. And you can hear loud voices on the other side of the door. And I look at Lucy, I go, this is stupid, Lucy. We came to an army base again, following your ideas, unarmed. This is stupid. This is just stupid. If they come through that door, there's only one guy with one rifle. I said, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to grab that AK. I'm going to hold the door. You better start punching your way through a wall or a window or something. But he wasn't having none of it. And so the reason the yelling that was going on, they had discovered my son's plate carrier with an American flag on it. And they're like, we want the Americans. We want the Americans. And the Iraqi army was going, no, we're not going to give them to you. They're not here. They left that behind as a gift. And after they bought that live, we came out of the room. The commander came over and shook our hands, said, hey, look, this isn't going to work. Let's put you on the bus, and out you go. He goes, but I'm going to drive. That bus that you go on is going to be full of Iraqi army. You're not going back on a public bus because you will get killed. You'll be caught by the Shia. You'll be sold to ISIS, and you will be killed. So I'm like, okay. And finally, we end up in Erbil. We talked to another group of professional people who make productions, and they want to tell our story. And that's when Lucy at that point gets fired. We create this 10-man group, and we move on to a city called Duhok. And in Duhok is where I start encountering the Kurds. Now, the Kurds are divided into 2 political factions, and they hate each other. So try to imagine the Kurdish Republican and Democrat. They hate each other so much that when they would share battle space, if one of them was to get hurt, and if he was let's say the majority were Republicans, and they had a few sprinkling of Democrats in that same fight, battling ISIS, they would leave the Democrats alone to die on the battlefield, and they would attend to their fellow political buddies first. It was absurd. They had no medical background, even how to save each other. Their idea was, if you get hurt in a fight, was to drive up to a civilian car, grab you, put you in a civilian car, and try to take you over this rough terrain back to a main hostel in a city that was 2 hours away. And it wasn't happening. They were dying out there due to medical knowledge. And we had this emergency medical doctor. He tried to create what I call the closest thing that would resemble combat lifesaver that the Army has. And I told them, look, this is how we did it in the first Kuwaiti War. And this is how we did it in Iraq. Even though you have a medic, you train the next smartest guy to be the backup medic. I said, that's the only way you can do it, because you just can't rely on your 2 medics or your 2 corpsmen. You just can't. It's too much. So and if they get killed, you want another guy who knows just as much as you to a certain point. He will never be that full qualified medic, but hey, at least he has some better knowledge than the next guy. Mm-hmm. The Army tried to overcome that with the combat lifesaver. Today, that course is not the same course years ago. That course years ago was much more sophisticated, much better than what it is today.
Oh, really? You think it'd be better today?
Oh, it's a horrible course compared to that course initially. Like back then, you can set up a guy on an intravenous line. You can put in a nasal cannula. You were able, if you did it right, if you count from the collarbone down to the second and third rib, I forget what the device is. Basically, it's when you have a gunshot wound and you drop that needle and it punctures a lung. You hear that pop and you let that air go out. So that hyperthermal.
It's a needle D, and what you're doing is releasing pressure from the chest cavity because one of your lungs has been punctured. You don't want to puncture it with the needle. That's not good.
They don't teach that anymore.
That's crazy. That's something in the Marines was pretty common. You know, you would do the nasal hose. You would do IVs. Even when I was at Anglico, we would just do IVs on each other. Like, hey doc, let's set up medical training. But if you did go through TCCC, is what it's called, then you would do live tissue training where when they have the pigs and stuff, and then you would do all the nose hose, needle D. Well, you wouldn't actually do needle D; they just show you how to do it.
So my son had soft tissue training. I had CLS training. Mm-hmm. I had first responders training. I seen a lot of traumatic trash out between being a police officer and being CLS and all these other tours that I've been on. So I felt really confident in my skills. And he came up with the idea to create this program that resembled a CLS program enhanced. And I was like, let's step it back a little bit because of language barrier, and let's get them more EMT trained, stabilize the patient, get them ready for movement, and instead of trying to teach them through a language barrier how to insert a catheter into a vein without basically collapsing the vein if the needle goes through the vein. It was just too complicated. So I said, let's just start out simple. The other thing I helped them with was how to manage. And the Army and the Marine Corps, from the day you start as a squad leader, well, you're learning how to manage people. So I told them, break your teams down, select your team leaders. Think of 3s and 4s. If you're a first sergeant, you got 3 platoon sergeants. You're an officer, you got 3 PLs. Those PLs and the platoon sergeant, they got 3 squads, but they only talk to squads. See what I'm saying? The rules of 3 and 4 management. So I kind of taught them that. Anyway, after I fired Lucy, after I created this 10-man team and we decided it was going to be Sinjar, one of the brothers decided, hey, we're going to put a mission op order together. It's going to be a transportation op order and involved an X amount of taxis, which was the safest way of maneuver. It required how much money was going to be spent on buying weapons and who was going, what vehicles they were going in, trip tickets, a whole 9 yards. I have to say, when he did it, he had a map and everything. He showed the route, how far we're going to go, what's going to happen when we get there. It just shows me the brilliance of our training. And I remember some of the guys in our team were not military. And they're like, wow, I really feel like I'm part of a well-organized team. And to me, it showed the education of an American soldier, regardless of branch of service, Marine or because the Marine could have easily done the same thing. But I was really, really proud of our armed services in that moment, how well organized we can be when it comes together. And so we take off, go to the Hook, and we meet with Asayesh. Asayesh is the Kurdish version of the FBI. And we pose as humanitarians instead of a warlike group. And they give us permission. to stay in the area, but not go into Sinjar. So we managed to collaborate with two ambulances, and we smuggled ourselves into Sinjar. And when we get to Sinjar, they take us all the way to the top of the mountain. And it's one side is ISIS, about 800 meters away at the foothills on the what I would say is the northern side. We were on the south side, and we controlled the top of the hill. The Kurdish controlled pockets of defenses, a line of defense on the top of the hills looking down to the city of Sinjar. Every once in a while, shots would get traded, or the ISIS faction would send mortars over on top of the hill. And when we got there, I found a clinic that had been abandoned by the Germans. Brand new equipment, brand new tents, brand new trailers, and we opened it up. And in our time period there, we treated over 700 patients. I even created a relationship between a group and us that were on the mountain that has some very negative reviews, and they were Kurds. And they had a dentist. We had a child that needed to see a dentist. So I walked over there and I went into SF mode because I had learned from my SF brothers when I was assigned to them how to behave. And we talked, we did a little training, we brought the child in, they did some dentist work on the child, and we brought the child back out, and they just gave us more and more credibility. We opened up relationships with people that would feed us, do our clothes, and we ended up with interpreters. And it was a hell of an experience on that humanitarian level. I remember my son coming in. My son was working very closely with a doctor because he had a great interest in medicine. And I said, James, you're going to work with Hoey. You and two are going to run the clinic. Josh, you're going to be my security guy. Polo, you're gonna start working on the security side as well, but we want to go from defense to offense. So work on your contacts so we can start doing ambush patrols. And mother, you're gonna be my rep. You're gonna be the smile on the poster child. He was such a good-hearted guy. Saw the best in everyone, no matter what. And the rest of the guys, they would filter in, keeping the area clean, making sure that we always had 24-hour security. We all shared responsibilities. We had medicine that had been collected. And this went on for a few months. And one day, a bunch of Toyotas show up in front of our position. And there's like 4 or 5 of them. And out comes this tall individual with blonde Viking hair, aviator glasses, wearing, I don't know, the latest in, he was a walk-in model for North Face. And so were the bunch of his guys. So he walks over, he goes, I heard you Americans were up here. I want to see what you're all about. And I said, I'm the leader. How can I help you? He goes, well, I'll be honest with you. I'm Marsoc. And we've been told you guys are up here. We want to check on you and let you know if you need anything. We're here to help you. I was okay. So we toured him around. We told him what we're doing. And as he gets us all together in the group and he gives us a few final remarks. And as he walks away, he looks over his shoulder and goes, here's the odd thing. You all claim you're humanitarians and you're here to provide medical aid to these people. But I've never seen such a bunch of hard pipe hitting motherfuckers in one location. There's no way you're going to tell me you're not you don't have combat arms experience. And again, I fell back on my SF. I'm like, hey, if they're not asking, we're not telling. So we didn't say anything. I just said, I kept on our story. Hey, we're here for a humanitarian effort. And we were executing that. Well, after they left, we got approached by General Shusho. General Shusho was a Yazidi Kurdish commander. And he was in charge of a brigade-sized element, about 3,000 to 5,000 Yazidi. And he needed training. And he basically told us, I want you to stay on my mountain and help my people. But do you have any military experience? And we're like, yeah, we have quite a bit. He goes, I need training in weapons. I need training in tactics. I need training in force protection. And his entire staff was made up of family. So his brigade executive officer was his son, named Yasser. And he was only about 30-some years old. None of them had real military experience that I could see. How deep in detail do you want me to go with this, brother? Because,
well, I mean, I'm fascinated by it. It just it's just crazy, right? Like the whole thing's crazy, right? Like, I'm not the only one sitting here thinking like how crazy this is.
So,
well, first off, you were in the Army at the time, right?
Yeah. So I was.
Were you like actual Army, or like Army National Guard?
Army National Guard.
So how did you even run this by them? Like how did that pan out?
I did. And so the Army National Guard has a program that's called ING. And ING allows you to go, basically you're frozen. And you can leave the National Guard for up to a year with the command's permission.
Okay.
And if you go longer than a year, then you have to make a decision, and they'll give you a general discharge, or you continue with the Guard and their obligations. One of the reasons the program exists is because a lot of our soldiers were private military contractors, and they were getting jobs overseas. So in order to continue retention, in order to continue recruitment, we made this available. And when I discovered it, I used it. And so I went to my colonel, and I said, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And he said, okay, I'll sign off on it. I said, we'll be back in a year.
I mean, this isn't like a normal military contracting gig, though. This is like you're just kind of going off into the abyss, hoping on the word of others kind of situation. You know what I'm saying? It's not like if you go through like, what is it, Z or whatever they call it now, or whatever Blackwater became, or one of the Triple Canopy, they have a process in place. It may not be the best process or whatever, but they at least have like a whole process. They have logistics like in place. They work directly with like the State Department to do their missions and stuff. But you're not doing any of that, and they still signed off on it.
Yep.
Interesting.
So they signed off on it, and we left. And so, like I said, we've been out there. We're up on this mountain. Like I said, at the highest number that I remember, we treated over 700 patients.
Yeah.
Let me tell you about.
Were these fighters or were these just locals?
They were survivors from the city of Sinjar. So what happened was, the Peshmerga came to Sinjar, the Yazidi people, which Sinjar is about heavily dominated Yazidi. They're not Christians. They are not Muslims. And so they worship, and I could be wrong, but if I remember correctly, they worship the sun and snakes, and they have their own temple up there. And they drink. And so the Peshmerga came in, but they are considered Yazidi Kurds. And so when the Peshmerga came in, the Arabic Peshmerga came in, they disarmed them and said, we will protect you against ISIS. And this is what was told to me by the leadership of the Yazidi.
Mm-hmm.
When ISIS finally launched its offensive, the Kurdish Peshmerga fled and abandoned them. And what followed was on the levels of the Holocaust of World War II. And the reason I say that, because I saw it with my own eyes.
That's a bold comparison, my friend.
No, listen here. I'm going to tell you what
millions of people were killed during the Holocaust.
Well, I'm talking about the horror of it.
Oh, okay.
Not
I thought you meant scope and size. I'm like, hold on.
The atrocities committed. They took men, women, and children and executed them, and they would just dump their bodies into holes. They wouldn't even cover it up. They openly sold the women from 6 years old to 60 years old as slaves. And they were considered sex slaves because, as the ISIS reported it, they're not people of the book. People of the book is a very common phrase meaning Jewish, or you're Christian, Judean, and Muslim. Those are your three people of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And since the Yazidi are not part of that book, they're considered a second-class human, and you can do what you want with them. And they were just murdering people left and right. And on the road leading to the top of the mountain, you can see stages of atrocities. Whole families wiped out, their bodies ripped out of you can see where they're ripped out of the car, and then they're shot and pushed down into this deep ravine. And there was like stages of decomposition of the bodies.
Yeah.
And then I remember we were in the clinic, and I make the comparison to the Holocaust because I've never seen evil at that level.
Yeah.
Against an unarmed population with such a heavy bias. I've never seen anything, except the only thing I ever read something similar was the World War II books talking about the Holocaust.
Yeah, for sure.
That's how I make that comparison.
Yeah. No, I get it. I remember when all this was happening. I mean, I was still in the military at the time. I want to say I might have been on deployment at the time. Because there was like talk about like, hey, there's got to be some kind of support mission to, help these people out that's surrounded by ISIS. They're all on this mountaintop. And yeah, I mean, I talked about it with Michael Farrell on the last podcast he and I did together. We were talking about like how insane we kind of just forgot about it. But like there for a while, they were releasing like videos of them burning people alive in cages, or throwing cages in the bottom of pools with people in them, or running people over with tanks, like just crazy shit. You know what I'm saying? Like horrible PR campaign going on. You know what I'm saying? Like, fuck.
It was one thing fighting Al Qaeda as a military force against these irregulars, but to watch irregulars take out their venom and use it against a civilian population and against children, it was disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
And my sons were not prepared for it. I wasn't really prepared for it mentally. And I saw some really terrible things out there. So to keep it the order in chronological order, this journey in chronological order, we switched gears and we start training them. We trained them in CQB. We learned how to, I didn't know this, but I had to learn it. I started to get in touch with sources across the water back in the US. Mm-hmm. I'm like, is it possible to zero an AK-47? And they said yes. And they would send me the material, I review it, and I always start teaching them how to zero it. It's completely different than the way we zero.
Well, yeah.
Have you ever zeroed an AK-47?
I have not, no. I've shot them, but I've never zeroed one.
So basically, what you do is you take out a rod that the AK-47 has, and you slip it in between the front sight posts, and you make sure that it's even on both sides. And you can adjust it, but it moves. It doesn't move like with clicks. It slides back and forth, and you got to figure it out. That's the closest you'll come. This weapon was not designed at the level of accuracy that our weapon systems can have the capacity to do.
So are you saying it's like a rear sight on a pistol kind of deal where you have to slide it, where you slide it back and forth?
Yep, it slides back and forth.
Yeah, okay.
And so in the elevation, it's the same thing. You move it around and it goes up and down, and you're trying to teach them, like, look, aim at the target, aim at the same exact spot. And you have an interpreter, but they're not making that connection. Yeah.
Because the language is still a language. They don't understand. Right. A lot of times, I think a lot of Americans don't realize how much slang we use daily. Or the way you say something, foreigners hear it, and they're like, what the hell? Because if you take it literally, it sounds crazy.
Right.
You know, like I would at my job, I would message people in India that we have, you know, working on a team, and be like, "Oh, that's cool, brother. Like, thanks a lot. I appreciate that." You know, and they're like, "That's cool, brother. Like, what is that?" You know, like,
Yeah.
you know, because it's just an expression. You don't. It's so
Exactly.
like when you use these little expressions and stuff, it's real hard for the unless it's a really good linguist to come through and translate all that.
And so you have to you have to hire a linguist who understands military phrases such as zeroing. What's the difference between battle site zero and mechanical zero? At one point, I learned the Mosin Nagant and the Russian sniper weapon system. I learned it. And I get all the material and I start teaching snipers using the Mosin Nagant. I'll say this about the weapon system. For as old as it is in design, in that round itself, the 7.62 by 59, I believe that's what it was. It's a phenomenal round. Quite simple in its entire design.
Makes you want to, it like wants to break your shoulder every time you fire it.
Actually, what you really had to be careful with, it was like when you're shooting the M40A1, it's steel. That optic is steel. And if you get too close to that steel and that thing kicks, well, you're going to leave yourself a nice scar to remind you never to do that again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so they would have this rubber piece. They would have the rubber piece on the optic, on the rear end of the optic. And if you put your eye up to it, it doesn't indicate you have proper eye relief. Well, I had to teach a lot of guys, like, don't worry about that rubber piece. Take it off, find your proper eyesight, proper eye relief, and then this is the kind of picture you should see. And I actually have video of me teaching this trash. And
you should send that to me. I'll put it on social media.
Okay, I'll send it to you. And I taught them about as much as possible in a short period. But I told them, look, what do you want? Do you want I said, I can teach what I learned as assigned to a Marine Corps Scout Sniper team. I can teach you the Marine Corps thing. Or I can teach you the Army way, which they produce their snipers at a much faster rate. Back then, the school was only 5 weeks long. Today, it's 7. But I said, I can teach you that. Or I can fuse all 3 concepts, meaning I can bring in the police SWAT sniper thing. And that's what eventually I ended up doing. First, I went into like very, very basic shooting fundamentals. I demonstrated it. We talked about it. Then we went into cover and concealment. Then we talked about not so much ghillie suits. We used more like veils and blankets to cover up in the open. Mm-hmm. I taught them how to dig certain type of holes, a 2-man fighting hole, the single-man fighting hole, and what we called the Ranger fighting position. I hate saying fighting hole, but Ranger, where you kind of basically laying flat. It's about 7-8 inches deep, and you're just kind of laying, you're laying almost in a prone. I taught them all that. I taught them about urban sniping. And you have to be concerned about your own personal backdrop, and when you take that shot, are you really taking a shot that you can still conceal yourself? Some of these things were highly complex to teach, so I kept it very, very basic. But the commanders, whether they were Kurdish or they were Yazidi, they wanted these guys like within 10 days. I'm like, that's impossible.
Yeah,
that is impossible. But I'll say this. When they came in with no shooting capability, whatever they learned, they came out better shooters.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you about this Mosin Nagant. There was an incident, and we are up in, my son and I are hidden in a hide, and we are in Old City Sinjar up on a hill, and we're looking out across, and we do this range card, and we range from the furthest point. It was like 1,400 meters, and we go back and we ranged it right back to our position. And I'm teaching my son how to do shooter's observer dialogue. And we practiced it every day for a couple of days. And then at night we would move away from the position, and then we reinsert again just before the light. Well, while we're in there hiding, I see an ISIS member. He's got an AK-47, and I can see the buses pulling in where they put the women into the buses, and they take them either to Syria or they take them to Talafar or Bakisha, which were two cities we were looking north. Yeah. So it was to the east. So that was to the west, because it was called, I think it was called Highway 48 or Highway 47 is what we called it. And that highway connected Syria to Mosul. So we knew that Sinjar was critical to them. And they were moving oil back and forth along there. And they were moving their sex slaves back and forth. And they were using it also as an MSR for troop deployment. Now, we were feeding this information to different military organizations out there as we collected all this information. And we also were watching where they were in the city. And based on activity, we were coming to conclusion, like, you have troops here in great numbers, and you have troops here in great numbers. And at one point, I'm out there watching, and I see this ISIS member. He's got the AK-40, and he's well beyond 800 meters. I range him, and it's 1,287 meters from my position. And this is literally how I did it. James Gilliland was my sniper section leader. And I remember discussing when he took his longest shot with his sniper weapon system against Al-Qaeda in Ramadi. Mm-hmm. He said, I raised it 12 feet, what I believe to be 12 feet above the target, and I moved it 12 feet in direction of the wind. And he takes his shot and kills this guy. So I thought, I'm going to mimic the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I raise it, and in my haste, in my inexperience at that shooting beyond the capability of a weapon, I see the round impact. And it impacts about what I would say less than 24 inches from his left leg. That means I miscalculated wind by 2 minutes. But my elevation would have hit him about waistline high if I had made a proper wind call. And I look at my son and go, did you see that? He's like, Dad, I can't believe how close you are. It was my most spectacular miss. And even though that weapon's antiquated, or power optic, a round that was designed 100 years ago, doesn't even have a tapered end, that's how accurate that weapon system still is today, and effective. Never seen anything like it. Would I use it? No.
I have one. It's a beater, though. It's not accurate at all. It's good for shooting a few rounds out of just for fun and stuff like that. But it's from the 50s. It still has communist stampings into it, like different like Asian. I don't know the markings, but there's some like communist like Chinese stampings or some shit on it. Yeah. I don't know what it is, but it has like the metal butt plate, like all that shit, and it is not fun to shoot. I'll shoot the most I'll shoot is like 20 rounds, and I'm like, nah, that's good. That's enough beating on the shoulder with it's a 7.62 by 54 for those that were wondering.
Yeah, it's it, 7.62 by 54. I knew it was 50 something. I did my research on the round. It was made over 100 years ago. Yeah, that design still exists today. So I ended up missing that guy by 24 inches because of wind call. That to me, like, damn, I still regret that. If I just taken my time a little bit more with that, I would have hit him. I know I would have. But anyway, so we got into a major firefight out there. We met other USANGs that what I call nationalists, because Shesha was part of the Peshmerga. Mm-hmm. But there was another member of the family, and he was a former Iraqi parliament member, and he created his own brigade. But his brigade, the way they spoke is like they wanted to be separated from Iraq, and they wanted to form their own army and have their own Kurdistan. And I thought I talked to my son James and Josh. I'm like, look, we're not getting involved in that political argument. He wants us to train their troops. I don't feel comfortable because I feel they're going to end up in a war or a battle with the Yazidi Peshmerga. So I don't want to get caught in the middle of that. So let's leave this alone. But he brought his brigade out, and they're on the front line. At one point, they don't want to wait for the offensive that's coming against Sinjar. And he pushes his brigade out, and they get flanked. And they withdraw. And when they withdrew, several of their guys got caught, and ISIS grabbed them, crucified them, and then burned them alive on the cross. And full view of us. It was medieval, man, out there. It was shocking. I could not believe what I was seeing. Hey, brother, let me hook up, because I'm talking off my phone.
Yeah.
Let me go get a cord and make sure this battery doesn't die.
Oh, okay, yeah, it's all good. All right.
So you asked a really good question, and I mean, I could tell you stories all about that, and if we have time, I will. And I'll tell you, what I do want to touch on is my experience out there as a Western volunteer. If I hadn't done it, I probably would be fighting in Ukraine right now. But based on my experience of what I saw out there in Sinjar with the Kurds, stopped me from ever thinking like that. I would never, ever do that again.
Why is that?
Because imagine you go into a place, into a town, and a few people are willing, and they're facing off against some kind of adversary, and you come in, and you realize that if this town galvanized itself, they wouldn't need you. And you realize that these people, they don't want to die for their freedom. They want somebody else to die for their freedom. And that's what I saw in the city of Dahuk, Solomania, Erbil. In some cases, not so much Sinjar, because they were under open attack. But in these big cities, I saw hundreds of, if not thousands of military-aged males. We're 2 hours away, there was another group ready to come in and roll over Iraq and begin atrocities of such horrible nature that you can't even begin to comprehend how evil is. And none of them were willing to die for it. There was a group, and they had their own standing army, so to speak, but honestly, the enemy was at the gate and no one cared. And that bothered me a lot. To the point where, like, what happened? My sons are dying for nothing. All these men care. It's like you're from San Diego, right?
Mm-hmm.
And imagine if the enemy was 2 hours north of you in Fontana. You were like, hey, man, we're going to draw the line. They're not going past this. And you would expect the entire city of military-aged males to defend their life, their lifestyle, their beliefs, and everything against this enemy that wants to take it all away from you and enslave your women and children, literally children. It's only a few hundred of you out of the thousands that it could be. That's disappointing. And
I don't think that's happening in Ukraine, though.
I
think they're making everybody fight, right? Because that's one of those situations where they're yeah.
That's a whole different. And there is different dynamics.
It's just anytime you go do that, though, anytime you go and volunteer to go fight in another country's war like that, I mean, obviously you're risking your own life walking into the unknown. You can't. Doesn't matter how much research or whatever you've done, you can't really fully understand local politics and customs and stuff unless you've lived there or something like that. So to walk into something like that's pretty intense. Plus, that kind of situation can also mark you with the U.S. government. Is like, hey, this dude might be some kind of fucking weirdo. He's out here volunteering to go fight, in other countries.
Yeah, they asked us, why are you out here? I'm like, what do you mean? And I couldn't answer the question at the given point. I would look and struggle for an answer while I'm out here. But for me personally, I was out there to protect my sons against themselves. Mm-hmm. I really was. But because of the culture, because of the culture in that country, the elders are looked as people who you listen and obey. And so even though it was my son James's idea, the culture wouldn't allow him to be recognized as a leader. So it fell on me and who I designated later, this guy that I called Mother, to lead the group. Because his brother would only be there for a couple weeks, and then he would leave the country altogether. And so I went up to Mother, and I was like, hey, Mother, why don't we, look, this is my idea. This is how I envision it. And you'll act like a commander, and I will act like your team sergeant. And I told him where my ideas came from. He agreed, and it worked well. But everything was always coming to me. And I remember when we were doing this documentary out there, and sorry.
No, you're all good.
Sorry, I was already
there with the phone.
I could say
No,
technical difficulty. Okay, so I remember being out there, and the journalist asked me questions, and I always struggled to say something, to have some clarity, to paint that perfect picture. But honestly, I couldn't. I didn't even have words to express my thoughts. I was disappointed by how the Western groups would treat each other. I was disappointed how the Iraqis could care less. It was business as usual for them. In terms of, I remember we rented an SUV to get around, paid the guy cash, and he was charging us an astronomical amount of money, not event. And at one point, we're like, hey, we're ready to give you the vehicle back. So we gave it back to him, and he's like, hey, there's damage on this vehicle. I'm thinking, there's no damage on that vehicle. Nothing more than you would see on an American rental that you're allowed to get away with. He was like, you're going to have to pay, like, I think he wanted $6,000. I was like, you're not getting it. He goes, I'm coming to get my money. And he would call me every day. Hey, when are you going to give me my money? I finally told him, like, you want to come up to Sinjar, to this battle zone? You're more than welcome to. Come get your money. So Mother goes, where are you going to come up with that money? I'm like, Mother, don't worry about it. He goes, I don't want to know what you're doing. I'm like, okay. And so my son comes in, and he saw that I was in a bad mood. He was like, Dad, what's going on? I was like, you believe this guy? We're fighting for his country. We're keeping the enemy at the gate. We're literally keeping them there. They haven't moved beyond Sinjar. And within months, we're going to take that city. And this guy wants to come and collect $6,000 because that's more important to him. If they get past that, the rest of this country will fold like dominoes. I go, but he wants his money. He goes, well, tell him to come up here and get it. He's so bold. I go, what about if he shows up? He goes, we'll deal with it accordingly. And me and him, we think alike. We're violent people. Like, all right. And Mother looked at us. He goes, oh, my God, what is wrong with you guys? Like Mother, grow up. We're not the United States Army out here. We're a bunch of freaking Westerners with our own ideas. And you know what? This area has brought these violent men together. And we will do what violent men do when we feel there's people in our way. And that's as far as I'll go with that. But that's how crazy it got out there. That's how dark it could get.
What was the plan for, like, weapons and stuff? Because you guys didn't bring any of that with you, right?
So we bought AK-47s. My sons bought AK-47s.
Was that hard to do?
No. You can just walk into a store like you're buying Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
You would pay like $400, $500 for it. That's it. And there was all kinds of aftermarket military poor quality products, from chest rigs to uniforms to hats, boots, you name it. They had it. And
how much American stuff did they have? Well,
they had plenty of M16s or M16A4s is what I saw.
Dang.
I didn't see any M4s out there, but I saw M16A4s.
It's because that's what we gave their military.
Right.
Turned around and hawked it to the local dealer.
Yeah. And so they were asking for those weapons close to $2,000 for those M16A4s.
Damn, that's America prices right there.
Yeah. They were asking for a lot of money, so I thought, And I told my sons, like, I don't want an AK-47. I'm going to get my hands on an M16A4. That's what I'm good with. And my son had brought out his own optics for the M16 A4. And he says, well, Dad, if you get one, I'll give you my optic. I'm like, all right, that's cool. So when I met General Shusho, we had a conversation over whiskey. And I convinced him, let me have your M16A4. And he said, okay. He goes, I'll give you and your son an M16A4. And you can have as many rounds as you want. So that's how we ended up with M16A4s. One night, both my sons, I thought I gotten killed in this particular firefight. And we were in the old city Sinjar. And all three of us were sleeping, and two of our guys were out pulling guard with the Kurdish when we got attacked. And it was vicious. RPGs were slamming into the building. Rounds were running across the rooftops. They were stitching across the outside. And I immediately woke up. My oldest son was sick, and so he wasn't waking up. And my second oldest was sitting there in the dark. And I remember turning the red light on and looking at him. And he goes, where are you going? And I said, I'm going out there because Mike is out there and Polo's out there. I'm going. And I pulled on my gear, and he had this look on his face like he wasn't comprehending how precarious of a situation we were in. And I wanted to yell at him and go, get off your ass, grab your weapon, come with me. But you can't. A man has to make that own decision himself. And I left. When I came out and I went out to the fighting position, I was moving like a cat in the darkness. Couldn't see anything. We had no night vision capability. I just remembered how to get out there from being out there in the daytime every so often. And I get out there and I see Mike, and he's behind his thing that looks like it resembles a huge AC unit, and there's a Kurd with them. They're both behind it. And I go up to in front of their position. I look, and I see this ISIS guy, and he's just shooting like randomly, like not realizing how close we are to him. So I remember yelling, hand me the RPG, hand me the RPG. I'm going to nail this guy. And the Kurdish guy goes, no, I'm not giving you the RPG because they'll know we're up here. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, in that moment, Polo shows up, and he's like, hey, man, they're coming up on our left flank. They're going to roll right into us. It's an open road, and nobody's holding it. I need you to come with me. So I go, okay. I go, Pete, I'm telling you, you got to kill that. You got to kill that guy. Because once he realizes there's no one opposing him or shooting back, he's found a foothold inside this building. So go kill him. So we leave, and I run into my sons in the dark. And I go, where are you going? Like, we're going to go hold down the left flank. I go, who else? He said, Dad, it's just the three of us. I'm like, all right. Let's go. So we move out, and we find two fighting positions. And they get together in one fighting position, and I'm on the far left. I'm the first fighting position that if they came up on the left flank, they would encounter me first. But they do a frontal assault on our two positions. And I'm shooting. I'm seeing figures in front of me, and I'm shooting, and they're going down. And I keep looking out, and I'm expecting to see a vehicle roll up on our left side, thinking the enemy's going to exploit this. When suddenly the right position that's containing my two sons explodes. And I remember thinking to myself, I just lost my two sons. They're dead. But I've got to keep fighting, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to help them if they're wounded. So I kept on fighting. For whatever reason, it ended. And when I came out of fighting position, I walked over. I could see smoke rising from their fighting position. And I walked over, and it's still dark, and I yelled out their names. No response. And I'm like, boys. And my second oldest stumbles out. His hair is like standing up like a cartoon character. His face is black. He goes, Dad, what the fuck happened? I go, what happened? He goes, my rifle exploded. I'm like, what are you talking about? I go, where's Josh? He's like, he's still in there. I go, is he alive? He's like, I think so. All of a sudden I hear my son's voice in the dark. My oldest son, he's still in the fighting position. He goes, Dad, I think I'm injured, but I don't think I'm injured. I need you to tell me if there's a bolt carrier attached like a big fat dildo to my forehead. And I look at my son, I go, I think your brother's okay. And I walk over, and he's got a bump on his front forehead. And he goes, I go, what happened? He goes, Dad, we were shooting them. They were falling. James is lining up his sight to kill the next guy when his rifle explodes. Well, it turns out later on that they were taking our ammo and they were pulling it apart and putting in some kind of explosive grains in there. And the bullets were basically booby trapped. And they didn't know which ones were good and which one were bad. So they just, when you're going and you're reaching into these piles of ammo, you don't know what kind of ammo you're pulling out.
That's crazy.
And so what saved him was he had closed his port. Magazine out of habit. And when he went to shoot this next mag is when his rifle exploded. And that, because the port was closed, obviously it's going to go down the path of least resistance. And it pushed his magazine out and it bulged the actual upper out. And that was it. But it was enough of an explosion to rock them in there. I remember that. Thinking how much I just lost both of them. Anyway, but getting back to what changed it for me was nobody cares. Not the Iraqis, not the Kurds. They didn't care that the enemy was at the gate. And that began to change me about my third month in. And my sons were seeing it, some of it. My oldest son, he was doing God's work out there, that's for sure, man. He was putting weapons together. He's a heavy weapons guy. We ended up doing an ambush patrol. Ended up doing a movement to contact patrol. We actually called in close air support. No lie. On a cell phone. Mother calls up the U.S. Embassy requesting close air support. They're like, who is this? And he goes, hey, this is such and such. And we need close air support. And they're like, there's no freaking way that's happening. Denied. And I look at him, I go, what'd you think they were going to do, bro?
Yeah.
We're out here on our own. There's nobody out here except us. What did you think was going to happen? All you did was waste battery. I mean, there were so many incidents out there. But let me tell you what happened when we came back home. Up to this point, both of my sons had seen heavy combat in Afghanistan as infantry Marines. But what happened to them, and realizing there was no one on their left and right, there were no friendlies, there was no one coming to help us, nothing. We were totally on our own. I can only think of their worst case scenarios building up in their head. After nearly being killed several times, some of it's caught on video. When they came back, they emotionally fell apart. They each went down dark paths. And today, they're doing fine. But it caused a rift in us where none of us were talking to each other. Each of us were dealing with our own demons in our own ways. And in some way, I dealt with mine, but I didn't turn it into alcoholism or drugs or anything like that. I just went numb. I went numb to everything. And they turned to, in terms of substance abuse. But, years later, I mean, they're both doing great. Both college, yeah, they're both doing well. They got through it. We had some tough talks. And we will never forget that experience.
Yeah,
would
man.
I ever do it again? No.
That's what I was about to say. Like, and I think you've learned the lesson that a lot of people are going to have to learn.
I'm sorry.
No, you're all good, dude. There's a lot of people that want to go to like Ukraine, or maybe not so much anymore, but towards the beginning, that was like a huge deal. Like people wanted to volunteer and go fight the Russians, Like, oh, it's like what's that movie? Freaking Red Dawn. You know, like
Red
I'm gonna go
Dawn.
fight the Russians, Wolverines. You know, but
Yeah.
the reality is now there's been multiple Americans killed. I think there's more than one that's in captivity right now.
Two.
You
There's
know,
two, okay.
and they just gave Brittany Griner 9 years in prison for 0.7 grams of hash oil. What do you think they're going to do to an American that's over there fighting? You know, it's
Killing
like,
Russians.
Did
Killing
you see
Russians.
it? Did you see at the beginning of the war that American that was from Texas, but he was pro Putin? He was fighting with the Russians.
No.
Yeah. He was like some Texas dude. Like he had a fucking big Russian fur hat, and he was out there with the Russians fighting the Ukrainians. I'm like, this is crazy. But either way, like, just not a good idea. You know, because people, there's nothing in it for you. When you're fighting another country's war, you're not going to get paid. If you do get paid, it's going to be almost nothing. You're not going to get cared for if you're injured. You might get field care at the point of injury, and then beyond that, it's going to be on you. It's not like the U.S. military where you get injured in Iraq or Afghanistan. It's like, hey, field care, level 3, whatever, a little bit of trauma care, and then move on to Germany and then on to Walter Reed. These different, there's like a process in place for that. If you get killed, your family's not getting anything. Like in the military, you're going to get $400,000 if you get killed overseas. Your family is. It's like none of that's there. None of the benefits of, like, if you want to do something, join the military, and maybe it'll come, maybe it won't, but at least you'll have like something out of it, like college education if you want to do that, or like I said, these medical benefits and stuff. It's just, it's crazy, man. That's a crazy. I know when that was going on, there were people that were like, I want to go fight ISIS. Some people did it because of just in general, ISIS is obviously a terrorist organization. There were some people that did it for religious reasons. They said it seemed like the next crusades or whatever, There was a lot, people have a lot of reasons to go do it.
And I want to say this. My experience is my experience.
For sure.
And it's no one else's, whether they were out there, whatever they experienced. Maybe, God hope, I've heard some great stories. I know some of these guys. One of my son's closest friends, he ran a hospital. He did a fantastic job. He was with us he came to replace my second oldest son, who said, you know what, Dad, I don't want to be here no more. I'm leaving. Mm-hmm. And so he decided to leave. Me and my oldest son are there. And he's like, Dad, I can contact this guy and we can fill that void. And we did. And he went on to do some great, great things. And I remember him telling me at one point, because we didn't see eye to eye and how to train people. But he had a charisma. He was funny, a little bit disorganized with his personal gear. He always seemed to lose something. But God love him, man. He took and found a niche, which was medicine. And I just got mad respect for what he did. He stayed over there for, I think, almost over a year and a half. And he helped a lot of people. He saved a lot of lives. And God bless him. And I hope that he deals with his trauma well, that, he lives a fruitful and beautiful and wonderful life, because that man deserves it.
For sure.
And so I'm not saying that my experience was everyone else's experience. It was me. I think it would have been a little different if I just had to worry about me and my team. But how do you tell a boy's mother your own flesh and blood has been killed? And I'm sure a lot of people, when they saw us out there, they thought it was my idea to come out there. It's not the truth. It was my second oldest son. I felt the responsibility when both of them went. And I thought, I cannot sit and wait for have someone tell me my son's dead. And it could have happened on several occasions. Mm-hmm. And by God's good grace, we managed to survive it. And the demons that chased us, we overcame them as well. And we're sitting here and we're all doing well. But the bottom line up front, at least for me, I can't speak for my sons. Although I have a good idea, I won't. I will never, ever do that again.
Probably smart, man.
Yeah. So.
Well, man, I really appreciate you coming on and telling the story because it's again, it's an interesting tale, or not a tale, but it's an interesting perspective, because there's a lot of people out there, and I think a lot of it lies with people that should have probably joined the military, but for some reason their family, friends, whatever, talked them out of it, or they just didn't think they could do it, and then they felt that as a need to, like, I don't know, quell some of those inner demons, I guess, from never joining, or even guys that were in the military that never went to combat. There's that as well. So there's a lot of people that go and do these sort of things. So it's always interesting to talk to someone that yourself, that actually did volunteer, and, the process of it, and you kind of gone through like how messy it is, and there's a lot of unknowns. You're trusting a lot of people that you may have just encountered. So yeah, I really appreciate that, man. I don't know if there's any kind of organization or anything you want to shout out before we get off here. Is there a Peshmerga volunteer group out there that?
No, I'll say this. We talked about James Gilliland. He runs his own company, Shadow 6 Consulting. He trains a lot of people, from civilians to law enforcement, and I believe he does some private contracting with military groups. I'm not quite sure, but James is a solid individual. I believe he was a contributing factor for me not surviving Ramadi, for winning and for fighting and winning in Ramadi. He was a contributing factor. Survivors are people that survive a catastrophe. I didn't survive a catastrophe out there. I went out there to fight, and I won. That's why I'm sitting here. But he was a major contributing factor to that. I think if anyone's interested, they should look him up. And off the top of my head, that's about it. That's all I got, brother.
Well, sick, man. I appreciate it. It's your second time on the show. If people haven't heard your previous podcast, they should go back and check that out. Good luck with whatever you're doing in the future. I don't know what you got coming up. I know you're still doing your Army National Guard stuff, and you just got back from JRTC, so I don't know if that means deployment's coming down the pipeline, or if
actually, I'm leaving for Iraq very, very soon.
I was gonna say, don't say it. Damn.
Yeah, we're leaving, and it's kind of like on open source, but I can't go any further than that for other reasons. But yeah,
cool, man.
It's gonna happen, and I'll just deal with that, and hopefully it'll be my last one. Come back, put in my retirement papers, and after that, it's just fishing, learning to play the guitar, read a few more books, drink some beers.
Live life, man. Just live life.
That's it. Live life. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm really grateful for, I think talking about it helps me a lot to deal with things. And I think if you really want to hear more, if you have certain questions anybody has, they can email me. HR Martinez 0065@gmail.com. I don't do Facebook. I'm on it, but I will not indulge in a Facebook. I'd rather just do private email and go at that. So
that's cool. Well, hey, man,
right.
People can check you out there. For my stuff, people can go to jkramergraphics.com. Make sure to check that out. I did start a Patreon, so please support the show. Go to patreon.com, make a donation. I think that'd be super awesome. And outside of that, hit me up on Instagram @FormerActionGuys, @FormerActionNews, and that's it.
All right, brother. You take care.
Hey, thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.